Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Martin Cullip. I'm International Fellow of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance Consumer Centre. We've got a show for you with some great guests. This is one of a series of panels that the Taxpayers Protection Alliance are doing in the run-up to COP11. Many of you will know that in February 2024, the TPA held a good cop, bad cop parallel event, which ran alongside the WHO's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control Conference of the Parties in Panama City. And our event, Good Cop, we provided a platform for experts in tobacco harm reduction to respond, fact check, and address issues that arose at COP10 in real time. Now, we are doing the same in Geneva this year in November, and I'm glad to say the three guests I have for you today have all agreed to come along and be experts at our Conference of the People. So today we're going to just question about the WHO, and with World No Tobacco Day coming up at the end of the month, is the WHO really taking this seriously when it comes to countries all over the world? And so I'll start with the intros. And from the UK, we have Reem Ibrahim. Reem is Communications Manager and Linda Whetstone Scholar at the Institute of Economic Affairs. She regularly appears on television and radio, including the BBC, LBC, GB News, Talk TV, and more, and has written for various national press, including the Telegraph, the Spectator, City M, the Express, and others. Reem has a particular interest in consumer choice, tobacco harm reduction, and tax policy, and is the co-author of A Vapid Solution: Why a Ban on Disposable Vapes Would Be a Failure of Law Enforcement. So welcome, Reem.
Hello, thank you, Martin.
Next up, we've got Kurt Yeo from South Africa. Kurt left a 16-year corporate career in information systems to help smokers switch to vaping after he did so himself over a decade ago. After growing tired of seeing misinformation about safer nicotine products in the media, Kurt co-founded Vaping Saved My Life in 2017 as a testimonial portal where vaping ex-smokers in his native South Africa could share their quitting journeys with others. And in 2019, he decided to leave the commercial aspects of vaping and dedicate his time to educating, promoting, and addressing misinformation about electronic nicotine delivery products. So welcome, Kurt.
Hello, Martin. Thank you very much for having me.
Anytime. And last but not least, Pippa Starr from Australia is an evidence-based public issue writer, public speaker, and consumer harm reduction advocate based in Australia. She's the founder of Alive, which is Australia Let's Improve Vaping Education, since May 2024. And the organisation's motto is "The truth is coming to get you." So welcome to you too, Pippa.
Thank you for having me.
So to start off with, I'll just direct this to you, Kurt, because you being in South Africa, this is something that's kind of on your turf. The WHO recently, last week in fact, had awards. It gave out awards for countries which had banned or heavily restricted THR products, tobacco harm reduction products. Now, what effect does that have on low and middle income countries, where obviously 80% of smokers actually live, with regard to their government policies? I mean, how is that going to influence them to go towards a World No Tobacco Day?
It's a very broad question, Martin, and I think one of the biggest problems that I see with the World Health Organization is that they try to apply the same set of rules across the board and thinking that it would work in numerous countries or any countries for that matter. So, I can only really talk from a South African perspective, but the reality is that in South Africa, we don't actually have any cessation support with regards to cigarette smoking or tobacco use. And we have an enormous illicit cigarette problem in South Africa. So these kind of awards only serve to elevate a certain portion of the South African community, and those are generally the people that are in tobacco control. But on the ground, it's a very different reality. And I don't believe that anything that the World Health Organization puts out is actually talking to the situation that's being felt on the ground. Our biggest challenge when it comes to no tobacco is trying to find ways to help people quit smoking. And when you have a country like, for example, South Africa, where we don't have cessation support, we have an enormous illicit cigarette trade, and we have no real will to help people quit smoking, it just it just doesn't fit. The only thing that I hear when it comes to the World Health Organization and No Tobacco Day is literally scriptures or from the gospel of the World Health Organization. But what if we look at Article 14, if you look at Article 15, which refers to illicit, none of those have been placed or put in place in South Africa with any kind of effect. So um, it's just, it really just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, apart from the fact that they have this, but there's really no real effort that's been done on the ground at root level. And I think Pippa raised it before we started recording, that there is no KPIs. And that's exactly it. There is no KPIs. It's just these are the scriptures, these are the 10 commandments, this is what you should follow. But no one's actually measuring who and what countries are actually achieving those KPIs and to what effect. Those are just the commandments. If you don't follow those commandments, then you are a bad person. If you follow these commandments, these are a good person. That's not what this is about. It should always be about how do we help people quit smoking and how do we prevent people from smoking in the future. And I don't see any of that in the LMRCs, in particular in South Africa.
That was going to be my next question, actually, because you came with us in February 2024 to Panama, didn't you? And now Panama is held up by the WHO as a fantastic country because it bans everything. It bans all harm reduction products. But I've never been to a place where you get tobacco harm reduction products and smoking so easily. And you have, like you mentioned, there's massive illicit market. Are the WHO actually living in reality, or are they just living in cloud cuckoo land here?
Well, I think I've heard many academics out there talk about it almost being a religion or a cult that, that this is the ideal, um, and this is what you should achieve to. And it's never ever about how do we get to those points. And if we just, you know, if we want to talk about helping people quit smoking, then we should look at the entire suite of tools that are available and see which are the most effective in that given country or in those given situations. So I agree. When we were in Panama, it was actually quite comical to watch them have the conference just down the road, and we've been offered disposable vapes and cigarettes and cigars and you name it from kids in a park just outside our hotel. And that's the reality, and that's what that's the sense I'm getting. Yeah, we have these diplomats and these delegates that are attending at these five-star hotels, at these conferences with their suits and their fancy water and all that. And in the ground, we're seeing people walking around with suitcases trying to sell disposable vapes to eke out a living. Let's face it, these kids were doing it so they can gather enough money to live their life. It's such a disconnect in the LMRCs. And it's, if we're going to have if we're going to prop up these ideals of or what we should be achieving as a smoke-free society, then what are the steps and what are the assistances needed, or what's the assistance needed for these LMRCs to get to those ideals? So there's this massive gap that I see around it. And I just think they have lost complete and utter, first of all, reality, the idea of reality. And second of all, I don't believe they really care. I really don't believe they care. Because if they really did plot, we would see the same kind of effort and drive that we've seen in other public health scenarios where the World Health Organization had taken a very active role in. When it comes to smoking, there's not an active role. It's just ideals that you need to work to, and then how you get there is your problem.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. I'll pop over to Australia now because, if anything, Australia is actually worse than South Africa. I mean, you really do have over there, don't you, Pippa? Probably the worst policies on THR in the world of any Western country. So, firstly, do you want to explain what they are? And do you sense that the arguments over there have had a lot of influence on WHO arguments have had influence on policymakers in Australia?
Sure, absolutely. Without going into too much detail, clearly Australia has the hardest, most draconian laws on vaping probably anywhere in the world right now. But you know what it's done? Predictably, it's opened up a massive black market. You know, the whole irony is it's easier to get a vape and it's cheaper to buy a cigarette than it ever has been before in Australia in this century. It's the cheapest cigarettes you can buy in Australia this century because the black market own they're the new tobacco control in Australia, essentially. Now let's have a look at the connect there with how do they come to make these fantastic decisions that saw the Laffer curve happen, or the point of diminishing returns where the tax excise, where we fast become the most expensive place to buy a cigarette in the world, to now becoming one of the cheapest in the South Pacific to buy a cigarette. I mean, you can buy a packet of 20 cigarettes starting from $6 here in Australia right now, and everywhere you want. In fact, there was a fantastic article that was released in the last week that showed that there are 60 new tobacconists where you can buy illicit vapes and cigarettes to every McDonald's. 60 more than every McDonald's store. McDonald's have got franchises everywhere. So absolutely massive. It's a growth industry. So how did that happen? And how did that, what part did the World Health Organization have in that? Well, World Health Organization, let's just very, very briefly have a look at this. Now, approximately 11, 12 years ago, they said their statement, not anybody else's, their statement. If we keep going as we are right now, we're going to lose up to 1 billion lives this century. That's what they said. Here we are, 11, 12 years later. How much success have they had? Well, right as we stand, we're on track to lose 1.2 billion lives this century. Well, obviously, that isn't not an improvement. So why would Australia go lean in on in every context of Australian government public health policy, leans in on World Health Organization guidelines, particularly 5.3. 5.3 briefly basically says, if there's any interference from anywhere, particularly made to keep tobacco companies out of the narrative, we keep them out of the narrative. But of course, I guess as Kurt was alluding to before, is they've kind of started creating this cultish own ideological narrative on what that actually means. I mean, we're seeing consumers who can no longer get their vapes by legal means advocating for vaping and just being blocked out of the conversation here in Australia. And if there's, but not only consumers, make no mistake, we're seeing the majority of harm reduction experts right across Australia. You'll see it on our website. We have well over 50 amazing experienced harm reduction experts with over 30 years on average per expert, with 7 Order of Australia medalists, with people who are from epidemiology to psychology, well qualified people who have been shut out of the conversation. Why? Because apparently their narrative doesn't suit the guidelines of the World Health Organization. They only happen to suit those who may have maybe some sort of drug addiction or something like that. We might bend to those type of people then. But hey, when it comes to tobacco and when it comes to vaping, we shouldn't listen to them. So look, that said, hey, us consumers and a far wider array and range of harm reduction advocates, we're going to endeavour to come together and we're going to rewrite this narrative here in Australia, with or without the World Health Organization. At least that's the goal. It's a big goal, I get it, but we're doing our darndest to do that. We make sure that us consumers are heard first and foremost, because no longer should the experts and the consumers be ignored just because Australia wants to be seen being the little country. Because, right, okay, big country by size, lots of koalas, kangaroos, stuff that'll kill you, including our government. So with that, they want to be seen as bigger than they are, so they don't mind pouring some money into the World Health Organization, FCTC. Sure, they'll be shouting from the rooftops and celebrating the likes of Emily Banks with the World Health Organization awards. But you know what? 66 people a day die from a tobacco-related illness every day here in Australia. That's 24,000 a year. That's every 4 years you think of the largest stadiums in the world that seat 100,000 people. Gone. Didn't have to be. Didn't have to be this way. We could have done something about it. But we've got to listen to the real experts and the consumers. World Health Organization could do a lot better to do the same so they can improve their level of success if they've got any success to report moving forward.
Yeah, they seem to have lost control completely in Australia, haven't they? And this is what Kurt said, that the WHO ranks countries on not how they are performing by getting rid of smoking, but by how they are performing in following the rules of the WHO, which isn't the same thing. So
Lost control is an understatement. We are literally seeing, we have seen the government throw $1 billion at this just in enforcement. $1 billion to play something that you could imagine like a Benny Hill comedy with, you know, running people down the street. And it kind of is, it is comical because it is a massive game of whack-a-mole. There is no chance that even the biggest army that Australia could form will close down the illicit market. You know what? In the history of Australian history, we have, in all the drug wars and everything we've had, let me tell you, we have not seen a bigger debacle, a bigger drug-related problem, if I can call it that, in Australian history of this magnitude ever, to the point where we've seen 246 suburban fire bombings happening as black market operators fight over each other for turf so that they can make more money and sell more product. This, yeah, I think one lesson to the rest of the world as we consider World Vape Day is, by Lord, don't go down this road. It's not worth it. It's not pretty. Businesses can't even be insured.
Let's just now ask Reem. We've just
Sorry.
over to the UK. No, it's fine. It's fine. It's lovely, nice and passionate, Pippa. That's exactly what we want. Reem, we'll go to the opposite. Well, not quite the opposite. It used to be the opposite extent because the UK used to have one of the best policies on harm reduction in the world, and it was renowned amongst the world. But now the UK government is currently dismantling that. So what's happening there? You know, I live in the UK. We know what's happening. Just give an idea, and also just try and tell us, because you're someone who sort of works in Westminster, what's behind all this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you, Martin. I think that with the UK specifically, we always use the UK and Sweden as two pretty brilliant countries when it came to tobacco harm reduction. I mean, Sweden, of course, have been able to get their smoking rates to below 5%, which is what we would call sort of smoke-free. And they've been able to do so by allowing adults to choose safer and healthier, low-risk nicotine products, namely snus. It's culturally important in Sweden, and it's effective in that way. What we've seen in the UK is the NHS on the website have said very, very specifically that vaping can be used as a tool to help people quit smoking. Now, this is entirely an antithesis to what the World Health Organization have advocated for. I mean, specifically, of course, we know that the WHO have effectively not been able to actually look at what countries are doing and the outcomes for smoking rates, the outcomes for people's health, but instead are taking things based on and sort of ranking countries based on their ability and their commitment to regulating these products. But what's interesting is the WHO have recommended things that we know are not nearly as effective as vaping and helping adults quit smoking. Things like using smartphone apps and cognitive behavioral therapy and behavioral support in other ways. And we know that these different tools are nowhere near as useful and as helpful for adults to quit smoking. And fundamentally, those kind of policies, prevent people from being able to quit smoking and ultimately save their lives. What's interesting in the UK is things have really taken a turn for the worst. We're, I think, about a week away from the complete ban on disposable vapes, which is coming in on the 1st of June. And what that means is that, as disposable vapes are so much cheaper than refillable vapes, it means that they're much more accessible, at least in the first instance. And the way I always think about it is, if you're an adult and you are a smoker and you are trying to quit smoking, you are going to much more likely to take the £5, £6 hit for a disposable vape that is a lot cheaper than a more expensive full mod, in which it's going to be a lot more of an investment for you and you might not really know how to use it. We also know that disposable vapes are, of course, so much easier to use. They are sort of draw activated, and it means that you don't have to fuss around with everything else that you need to with a more modular vape. So it's really fascinating to me that the harm reduction, or quote unquote harm reduction, approach has completely shifted, and the government are literally banning a product that is so much safer and healthier for adults, and of course is so much easier for them to actually do that when we're thinking about it from a behavioural perspective. Now, if Pippa's Australian example is anything to go by, we know that on the 1st of June, the government's ban will not then mean that all disposable vapes completely disappear. We are probably going to see a huge illicit market open up, and we're already seeing that. A lot of the legal purchases have declined, but of course we know that a lot of the rates of those people using them have not declined. A lot of it is illegal. It's coming in from countries like China. Of course, it's not regulated. And I think what's really interesting about the Australian example is the criminality that has come about. And I don't just mean the illegal products themselves, but the way in which it has breeded a huge attack. And the illicit market in Australia, as Pippa has very eloquently outlined, has absolutely boomed. And there is really no way of getting back to that. I think UK policymakers should really look at the Australian example and really look at the fact that just because you ban something and, again, don't spend any extra money on enforcement, you don't then just take it away from the market. And actually what's probably going to happen is you have this approach where either these products are provided by a taxed and regulated private sector, or they're provided by criminal gangs. There is no third option in which they're provided by nobody. And making it more difficult for adults to quit smoking will cost lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there no sort of major investment in enforcement. I think the government have promised 10 million or something, which works out 30,000 per trading standards office. I mean, you can't even employ someone on that sort of money.
No, you can't. It really is pennies. And what's interesting is, just to answer your earlier question directly about why this is happening, there are sort of two main arguments for a lot of these particular regulations. One of them is to protect the environment, and the other is to protect children. Now, of course, we know that youth vaping statistics tend to be overstated. In the UK, there are double the number of 11 to 17-year-olds that drink alcohol regularly than vape regularly, but no one is saying, okay, well, we're going to ban alcohol for everyone because some people that are already banned from buying it manage to get their hands on it. It is already illegal for children to access vaping products. That is already the law. So clearly the problem is a lack of law enforcement, a lack of real enforcement, and not the fact that we need to restrict these products for everyone. It seems to me such a poor basis for legislation that we would ban a product for people that are already banned from buying it and restrict that from anybody else. So it's interesting from that perspective. And of course, the statistics are hugely overstated. And I think that it's interesting. It's one of those conversations that are, of course, very difficult. The mums net, or people online that are very, very upset about young people and the uptake of vaping. But of course, when we're thinking about this and comparing it to smoking rates, smoking rates have basically plummeted. They're non-existent amongst teenagers and young people. And of course, we have seen a slight uptick in vaping, but again, really, really minuscule in comparison to other things that we don't tend to ban, and when there are no plans to completely prohibit alcohol. So I think that does tell you a little bit about that. The second argument that is often used is around the environment, and the fact that specifically with disposable vapes, they're harmful to the environment. But we also do know that a lot of it is to do with the lithium production. And, again, if we're applying this same consistent principle, okay, vaping, disposable vapes, they are harmful to the environment because of the lithium production. At the same time, you've got so many other products that are, of course, needed for lithium production. You've got things like electric cars, but nobody is saying we need to ban electric cars because of the environmental impact. So clearly there are some misconstrued evidence that's being used for this kind of legislation. And a lot of it, I think, is around the moral panic. The disposable vape ban came from DEFRA, came from the Department for Environment and Food and Rural Affairs, didn't come from public health. So what's interesting is the environmental arguments are really what drove the legislation, but the youth vaping arguments and what is really at the forefront of their media campaign around the legislation. And again, it is such a poor basis for legislation. The environmental impacts can be mitigated through things like a deposit return scheme. You buy the products once you've used them, you can hand them back in. They can be disposed of in a more environmentally friendly way, and you get a bit of money back, or you get a discount on your next product, whatever it is. But there are ways to mitigate this, and there are ways in which it has worked in other countries. So I just can't understand for the life of me why the government would take away such a safer and healthier alternative from millions of adults when it is so much easier for them to use it. And again, restricting it, the more you make it difficult for adults to switch to vaping, the more lives that end up being lost.
Absolutely, yeah. Kurt, you were going to say something on that. I'm going back to what you said, where you said that the WHO doesn't even seem to care. Do governments seem to care? And we just heard about Australia. We've just heard about the UK. They seem to just dismiss the adult smokers and adult vapors as if they're inconsequential. Do you find the same happens over your way?
I think generally we've been programmed as a society to look at people who smoke as outcasts. I've always said that smokers and now vapors are seen as second-class citizens, and it's not just because of some of the regulations and rules that have been placed around the world where smoking is prohibited, and as the years go by, the further the distance is from an open window or door, the kind of products, the way the products are displayed, you name it. There's a whole host of things to create that stigma, to ostracize these individuals without actually getting involved to understand what the situation is. I mean, we all know that for a lot of people, smoking is almost self-soothing or self-medication because they are experiencing other issues. I mean, it's very closely linked to mental health. It's very closely linked to a lot of disparities in society. I mean, the reason why 80% of the world's smokers are found in LMICs is because of their social economic situation. So we've been programmed to outcast or see these people as outcasts. And I think the government and many tobacco control people are riding that wave, because now they've switched from smoking to another nicotine alternative, which happens to be significantly less harmful. It's just very easy for them to just switch. It's just another addiction. It's just another ploy from the tobacco company. It's such an easy step for them. So I don't believe they care. I don't believe they've ever really cared, to be honest. I think that they've found a way of, first of all, creating control, establishing control, and second of all, generating some kind of revenue. a very wise doctor in South Africa, Dr. Leclape, who is a big hero of mine, he said that nicotine is a very addictive substance. Not only does it addict people when it comes to smoking, but it addicts companies with profits, and it addicts governments with tax, and it addicts academics with prestige. So those are the things that we've seen around you. The reason why I wanted to interject is that Pippa was raising a point around how there's this disconnect and this, this focus around vaping. I mean, just recently, or just yesterday, I was provided an article of a newspaper where they raided a high school, very close to my hometown. And the image that was splashed onto the article was they raided this high school and they discovered all of these disposable vapes. And obviously, everybody jumped on and said, this is a huge issue, it's vapes amongst the youth and so forth. But they didn't focus on the alcohol that they recovered at the school from these kids. Kids were taking alcohol to school. And they didn't really talk about the amount of weapons that they found in the schools, including a Crocodile Dundee blade that was found on one of the kids. It was the disposable vapes. And what they also don't establish is that yes, we might have an issue with youth vaping in South Africa, but it's directly linked to the fact that we are not focusing on the real issues as to why there's these products. I mean, alcohol, vapes, weapons. I can imagine the amount of cigarettes they found there, and even probably marijuana, what we call dacha over there, but it's the disposable vapes. So it's become this new shiny toy for control, this new shiny toy to appear to be wanting to do something, or even appear to be doing something. But the reality is, as we've seen with Pippa, and what we'll probably see in the UK and other parts of the world, is that what the WO wants you to do is tick the box. Whether it's achieved or whether it had approved anything or made it better or made a difference is not the point. The point is you tick the box. And when it comes to lives and people's lives and the impact that it has on society, the family unit, all of these things, that's where I believe the focus should be. Is, does it improve those individuals' lives? Does it improve their family lives, the community's lives, so forth and so on? That's not in the interest of the WHO or any other governments that kowtow or prescribe themselves to this dictate or to this gospel of the WHO. So I don't, yes, the answer, very short, I don't believe they have ever cared, really.
It's interesting what you say there about how, I mean, basically what you're saying is these governments are legislating rather than governing. They're just passing laws, not actually looking at how the laws are going to affect their populations. And one thing we find about all of these rules that come from the WHO and all their exhortations for governments to do this, that, and the other, every one of them are regressive. They all hurt the poor or those in mental health. And I was going to ask you, Pippa, because about the time of COP8 in Geneva, the 8th Conference of Parties, there was a big buzz around what the Framework Convention Alliance called the need for gender-responsive tobacco control programming. But have you ever seen any of that? Because I haven't.
No, I must admit it might have got past me. That much does.
Well, we know, don't we, that people in the LGBT community tend to smoke more than other sections of society, and yet that seems to be completely ignored by the FCTC. So they do like jumping on bandwagons here and there, but if it means actually doing something about it, it doesn't really want to do much at all, it seems to me.
Look, absolutely. Of course, LGBTQI population is somewhere around about 11% in most average areas around the world. Now, if you look at the smoking rates of LGBTQI cohorts, it is well known here in Australia that it is one of those marginalised cohorts which generally have around about double the average national smoking rate. So it's an area where we can do better. It's an area where a lot of people are known to go through all sorts of interesting stresses and problems, and nicotine may help them with those things. But by goodness, once again, we've got to make sure the narrative is right, that the safest delivery, no matter what margin, what cohort is a risk of smoking, is getting the right message regarding the safer delivery of nicotine. Yeah, and if you want to if they want to sort of play grandstanding and virtue signaling on what is the hot topic at the time and all that sort of thing, because LGBTQI rights are on the table and trendy as they probably were maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and maybe just that might vary depending where you are in the world. Look, this isn't the time to grandstand and virtue signal. This is obviously with every cohort there must be real action and serious action and compassion taken, and really listen to people.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also going to touch on taxation that you mentioned, Kurt. I like Jose Lapi's description of people getting addicted to taxation. Now, Reem, in the UK, we're planning, aren't we, in 2026 to have a massive tax on e-cigarette liquid in the UK. I think it's £2.20 per 10 milligrams. Now, considering I can buy 10 milligrams for around about £3 at the moment, that's almost doubling the price, isn't it? I mean, how's that going to affect everything?
It is, and of course is going to make things a lot more expensive in terms of those adults that do want to quit smoking. So I think it's £2.20 per 10 mil of vape liquid. And of course that does just increase the cost. It also probably means that the already illicit market is probably going to increase in size as people increasingly see vaping as more expensive. The interesting thing is that it came in line with tobacco duty rises. So there is, at the very least, an understanding that that vaping is a substitute for tobacco products, and that therefore you have to ensure that vaping always remains the cheaper option. So at the very least, there is that understanding, and the increase has always been effectively that tobacco is going to be more expensive, tobacco duty is going to be more expensive. I mean, the UK is literally the worst country in all of Europe to smoke in terms of how expensive it is, how heavily regulated it is. And so when you compare the cost of that, the increase in vaping duty is not going to have that much of an impact on the differences. I think what's interesting about it very specifically is that cliff edge, and the more you make vaping expensive, the harder it is for those people to actually quit. It does seem as though this came from the arguments around the World Health Organization labeling the evidence around the health impacts of vaping as complex, as the fact that vaping might be recommended, it might be a cessation aid, but in many cases they haven't been as stringent on it, they haven't been as confident in their language with it, and I think that has impacted the way in which policymakers view vaping. There is so much misinformation. It's absolutely insane. All of you do so much work to tackle a lot of that misinformation, but it is really quite shocking when you look at a lot of the polling. So many smokers in the UK still do not know that that vaping is so much safer than smoking. So many of them do not know about it, and I think that policies like this just reinforce that misinformation. The idea that vaping is somehow worse, or somehow we don't have the evidence around it, that it's a bad thing that people should be looking at. And of course, these new taxes coming in have reinforced that kind of perspective. So from a consumer's perspective, it's much, you're much more likely to go to the illicit market if you already use those products. But again, the fact that it's become more expensive, I think, has reinforced the existing misinformation, the existing misconceptions around vaping. And of course, just like at a very basic level, it makes quitting smoking additional cost. It adds an additional cost to it. It makes it more expensive. And so I think that at a very basic level, there is that element to it.
Yeah, it doesn't help that during the tobacco and vapes bill, one of the Lords, when it went through the House of Lords, tried to sort of discount the idea that vaping is much less harmful than smoking by saying, well, we shouldn't give it a free pass because it is slightly less harmful than smoking. That's what one of the Lords said.
And just to add to that, with the tobacco and vapes bill, which I'm surprised we hadn't mentioned already, it's going to give ministers so much power to regulate vaping products is going to give them so much influence over what they're actually doing. So that includes advertising, that includes, I think most perniciously, vape flavors. So the fact that this legislation, I think in some ways, from a constitutional perspective, is so dangerous. It takes away parliamentary sovereignty. It means that the minister, literally at their whim, can decide, if they wish to ban vape flavors entirely, to restrict their use, to ensure that advertising isn't allowed. And of course, that means that people are way less likely to know about these products in the first place. So I think that one of the most pernicious parts of it is, of course, that huge, vast amount of power that the public health minister will get. And, if we get a public health minister that is so ridiculous that they don't understand the real health implications of switching to vaping, they could just outlaw all flavors, outlaw advertisement, and that will undoubtedly have an impact on cessation rates.
Without reference to Parliament, they can just
yes, and sorry, very crucially, without anybody else checking that. Like, this gives them the power, and they don't have to pass new legislation. They don't have to check with every other 649 members of Parliament. Nope, this one minister can literally be the almighty dictator of vaping regulation.
I just want to point out, by the way, that the UK's idea of heavy taxation of vaping products, this is a policy that was favoured by the WHO in its call for action against vaping in December 2023. So that's come directly from the WHO. And let's also talk about flavours, because last week the WHO held a webinar which I watched, and it finished with someone from the FCTC Secretariat saying to all the people who were watching, and they said there were 600 people watching, that every country needs to ban all flavours of these things. Now, this was a webinar they hosted on the subject of World No Tobacco Day. I mean, how does that fit, Kurt? They're talking about banning all flavours at the same time as they're saying they want to achieve a World No Tobacco Day.
Well, I think it goes to, they classify any nicotine product outside of the pharmaceutical umbrella as a tobacco product. Whether it is no flavor vape or a vape that contains every flavor under the world, like a Willy Wonka's flavor, it's all considered as a tobacco product. So they don't distinguish that difference between any of these products anymore. It's just convenient for them to just say it's a tobacco product because it might have nicotine in it, unless it's manufactured by a pharmaceutical company. So the reality is that what we've seen, for example, in Pippa, and what we're going to see around the world, is that they can ban all these flavors, but it's really never going to happen. It's not going to happen. These flavors will always be there. We see this, for example, in the United States, where only a handful of products have been approved by the FDA, but yet there is every flavor available on that market. We see this in India, we see this in Mexico, we see this in any other country. I've even heard of it in Singapore. I mean, Singapore is one of the most rigid countries in the world, and flavored vapes are available in Singapore. So again, it goes back to what's happening in the UK. It's about creating those levers for people for around control, and it's actually never about trying to address the problem. If you really want to have a no tobacco day, then let's talk about having a no tobacco day. Let's properly classify what is tobacco, and then we have the spectrum of risk and the spectrum of harm, and what are we trying to deal with? We're trying to deal with tobacco. Smoked tobacco in the form of the cigarettes kills more than 8 million people every single year. I don't know how trustworthy those figures anymore. I think those figures will be slightly elevated if we consider that smoking has increased over the last 20 years. It's not decreasing. So if we want to talk about No Tobacco Day, then let's talk about tobacco. And I don't think the World Health Organization wants to talk about tobacco in its true sense. They want to talk about this entire pie in the sky. It doesn't fall within their narrative. It's just, it's not going to work. We're never going to get a no tobacco or tobacco-free society if we continue with this route, because we're setting up these hurdles everywhere around the world to prevent people from making that very obvious switch to a safe alternative. And that, what we've seen in Sweden, what we've seen in New Zealand, what we saw in the UK for a period of time, and I'm sure it's still there, is that the fastest way you get to a no tobacco scenario is provide alternatives to individuals that are looking for better life, a better quality of life, a safer option, a cheaper, more enjoyable, acceptable option. That's the fastest way you get to any scenario, not through bans, not through prohibition, because all it does is it just moves the market into areas and into spaces where control is completely lost. So none of this actually makes any sense to me anymore. It really just doesn't. I read it and see it as literally a story. There's no facts of anything. It's so much misinformation around it. And the reality is what we're going to be seeing is that people are going to ignore these dictates. They're going to ignore the advice of the World Health Organization, and they're going to ignore the advice of the health authorities, which is an incredibly dangerous place to go, because that becomes now a tipping point for them to not believe in other scenarios and other situations which are incredibly important and are life-threatening, very acutely life-threatening. And we're starting to see things, for example, vaccine denial, denying vaccines actually work, because there's a trust deficit now. People are stop trusting the authorities because they've been so fixated on sharing misinformation and actually spreading misinformation to such a point where some of the stuff is actually considered as disinformation. So I'm going in a long while tangent, but I basically want to say is that the fastest way you get to no tobacco day is to provide alternatives and solutions that the people want and the people are craving for. Most people that smoke want to quit smoking. Most. Eventually they get to that point in their life where they want to quit smoking. But we also know that it's incredibly difficult to quit smoking. So what do you put in place? You provide them with solutions and options for them to make that transition. And you make those options accessible, enjoyable, and relatively cheaper than what they're currently doing. That's the fastest way we get to it. So banning this, stopping that, regulating that is not the route to take. And history has told us this. We can go all the way back in history, but the most perfect example are two: 1920s, prohibition on alcohol, and South Africa's 2020 ban on the sale of tobacco and vape products for 5.5 months literally opened the floodgates to the fastest growing illicit cigarette market that anybody's seen. So, yeah, I don't believe it's going to, there's no World Vape Day. Oh, no, sorry, there's no World No Tobacco Day. It's just marketing.
I think we're all going to the black market, to be honest, Kurt. Even me in the UK, I'm still
Yeah.
looking at things I'm going to buy illicitly. But it was, yeah, it's interesting you say, because during that those awards that they gave an award, for example, to the health minister of Belgium for banning nicotine pouches. So he's banned something that's not tobacco, and that was apparently to celebrate World No Tobacco Day. And they gave an award to the Prime Minister of the Maldives, who's banned all vaping products and use of vaping products. And I actually said, if a tourist comes to the Maldives with a vape, we will confiscate it off them. And that is not a tobacco product. And yet this is apparently all about World No Tobacco Day. And the situation with you, Pippa, in Australia, what are the vape products you can buy? And are they flavored? What are they?
Right, so we've got a choice of tobacco, mint, and menthol. If you could be bothered going to find one of only a handful of chemists who may be interested in selling you an overpriced system that looks something like that. Very boring, very plain, very substandard, often nicotined at a very high level, which is very difficult to self-titrate or self-regulate the amount of nicotine you might want to use. So, yeah, people just go to the black market. The black market dominates. And can I just sort of say on flavors, leading on a little bit from what Kurt Yeo was saying, I want to make an interesting point. If they want to lump They want to lump vaping in as a tobacco product, and they want to say no flavors. Well, let me tell you a fun fact. The fun fact is most legal cigarettes on the market, the ones you smoke, the combustible ones, contain PG-based flavorings. I don't care whether it's tobacco flavor, vanilla flavor, Timbuktu flavor, Port Royal tobacco, they contain a PG-based flavorings. They have for years, even before there was vaping. Right? So if you want to ban flavorings, ban the flavorings out of the things that kill you, that we know combustible tobacco obviously does.
Can I
Now, I think
interject there, Pippa? Maybe they should also
yeah,
introduce a tobacco lozenge, Nicorette, or nicotine gum and lozenge. Introduce tobacco flavored gums and lozenges.
Yeah, because they're all
So
fruity
that
flavors,
well,
aren't
look, why don't we introduce um alcohol anonymous meetings to become inside a pub where they can exercise self-control. Come on, it isn't going to happen. It's a ridiculous thing to do. Why don't we ban light beer so everybody's got to drink heavy beer? It's a ridiculous notion. It's ridiculous. You can make a multitude of metaphorical statements, whether it be, let's ban low-fat product and only have the high-fat product or whatever. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. Let's face it, most governments involved with the World Health Organization benefit greatly from the taxes that are from the sale of tobacco products. That is the problem. That is a huge problem. The World Health Organization don't seem to be really helping there. But I'll tell you what has come out of this discussion that I've learned tonight, including God help the UK, God save our king, God save everything over there, because I've seen the history of some fire bombings happening in the UK before. If they go down this route of prohibition, and let's call it prohibition, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Remember the great Winston Churchill once had to fill out a prescription for some whiskey in the US of A back in the day of prohibition. It is prohibition under any form. They are in for a hell of a ride. We are very tame, very loving, very friendly souls here in Australia, as I know many people are in the UK. But I'll tell you what, you let this whole black market on the loose, it's not something that you can reel back in easily. In fact, the government is grappling right now to work out how the hell they can reel this back in, and they're losing it. They're losing it.
If I can just add to that, what's interesting is that, somebody has literally died as a result of these fire bombings. And I remember bringing this up to a UK policymaker. They just almost completely ignore the fact that it's happening. It's quite psychologically, I think, fascinating that the Australian example is literally just simply being ignored. They just completely refuse to accept that is a possibility, and that what they're doing is on the road towards what Australia have done.
Well, I suggest them to ignore at their own peril. Ignore at their own peril. If they want to have the next Godfather movie based about what happened in the UK between 2025 and 2035, and real life. I mean, in all seriousness, innocent people murdered, people shot before, people having gang fights in broad daylight in shopping centre car parks. People pulled up at traffic lights with a knife. This is Australia.
Yeah.
That's the only thing you should have to worry about here in Australia is not gunfire, is not bombings. I mean, we've got enough to worry about with the spiders and the snakes and the crocodiles and the sharks, okay?
Absolutely. Listen, we're running short on time, so I want to ask you all one other question just to finish off. The TPA, of course, is holding our Good Cop 2 conference in Geneva, Conference of the People, sorry, in November, and we're looking forward to hosting all of you at that event. But starting with you, Reem, what should consumers be doing right now, and how can they fight against this sort of stuff?
I think fundamentally, the first thing is ensure that policymakers are aware of their own stories. If you are a vapor that has quit smoking, your story is so valuable. And I think that for so many of those people, literally just writing to your member of parliament, there are organisations that have made that a lot easier if you want to check those out. But there are ways in which you can do that, and just getting your story out there and ensuring that your local member of parliament, whoever it is, no matter what party they're from, because all parties, at least at the moment in the UK, are really, really awful on this. Ensuring that they all know your story, because your story is so powerful, and knowing that real life consumers, this isn't just a number, these are real people that are able to spend more time with their children, that are able to look towards a healthier life as a result of smoking cessation.
That's great. And Pippa, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, look, absolutely, I concur, and I'll run on from there. Look, although we in our most recent decisions we made here in Australia regarding the draconian laws that were put in place in July last year, on the back of 84% of all submissions to the inquiry for that bill being not in favour of that bill, they still went ahead anyway. I don't want that horrible statistic to turn people off from not telling their vape story. I think the problem is we've been battling this hard and long for a long time. We got a little bit worn out. We're back up and we're regenerating under Alive now. But the UK's never had to have a battle like this before. I'm looking forward to seeing how they go over there, because you guys should be just coming together en masse, telling your stories. I don't care, on all the social medias, find a catchy hashtag, tell your story, your real story. Don't be ashamed of who you are, or what the reason was why you gave up smoking and switched to vaping, and why it's important to you. I tell you what, don't even necessarily do it for yourself. Just think you've got one opportunity in this lifetime to prevent thousands of thousands of thousands of people from dying from smoking in the future. For what? Just doing one little letter to a policymaker, doing one little TikTok video and tagging a legislator. Just do something. To sit on your hands and do nothing is not going to help save lives.
I agree. And obviously to be vocal around World Vape Day and World No Tobacco Day. Is that right, Kurt? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Well, I'm going to take a
You
slightly
know,
cynical approach here. I think politicians only care when the next election comes along, when they're wanting or buying votes. So in those areas of between those period of time, I think what we should be doing as people that vape is to just continue vaping. And to make sure that your closest people, the closest loved ones to you that are smokers, to get them to switch. And the tsunami eventually grows to where everybody now understands it to be the truth based on their own lived experience. And like we've seen with any other great invention in the world that has faced enormous pushback, is it's about this acceptance that the population has made their own decisions based on their own research and based on their own feelings and they're based on their own experiences, that eventually the policymakers will then you be too scared to be too aggressive towards a particular product. You know, South Africa, since the fall of apartheid, has become the capital of silent protests. You know, we do things because we have come to the understanding that the parliament or the government actually don't really care what we think or feel. So we just do it in a way that objects to whatever the dictate is of that particular country. And when it comes to the harm reduction, we've seen it many times in South Africa. So my only advice to people out there that do vape is to continue vaping and to continue vaping the safest way you possibly can. and to share your stories. Not only you can share your stories on our platforms, we always welcome it on VSML, to share your stories, but to share it more importantly to those people closest to you. Let them make the proper decision, because at the end of the day, it's about your life, it's about your family's life, it's about their happiness and their enjoyment, and their giving them time to spend with their loved ones. And with that, eventually the penny will drop that these products are successful. These products do help people live a better quality of life, and it does save lives, hence the name of the movement. Therefore, that's my only advice to everybody else.
I love it. Almost like no surrender. I love that. That's great. Anyway, thanks very much, all of you, Kurt, Reem, and Pippa, for joining us. And I'll see you in Geneva. And thanks very much for a great show.
Thank
Bye.
you for having us.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.